I'm David, 33 years old, living in Seattle, Washington. My life's pretty simple, nothing too complicated, but I feel lucky to have a wonderful family. My wife, Emily, is someone I've always trusted and loved. She's a special woman, not just because of her calm and caring nature, but also for the way she manages to keep everything balanced at home. We have 2 kids, 1 boy and 1 girl, and every day spent with them is a gift. Emily and I met 7 years ago when I was 26 and she was 24. At the time, I had just graduated and was working at a tech company, while she worked at a small coffee shop in Capitol Hill. That coffee shop was unique, small, quiet, with a cozy atmosphere. I remember the first time I saw Emily. She was the barista, and every time I stopped by for coffee in the mornings, she'd greet me with a warm smile. What caught my attention wasn't just her smile, though, it was how she carried herself. She was easy to talk to, soft-spoken but sharp, and there was just something about her that drew me in. At first, I was just a regular customer, but as I kept coming back, we started chatting more. We'd talk about life, work, the little things that made each day unique. She wasn't just good at making coffee, she was passionate about her work too, and that really impressed me. Emily worked at a nonprofit that supported underprivileged communities, and I admired her dedication to something bigger than herself. Her job was challenging, but she always seemed to handle it with such grace. On top of all that, she was healthy, fit, and always looked after herself, which made me respect her even more. After a few months of casual chats, we started dating. I'm not usually the type to open up quickly, but with Emily, it was different. She had this natural way of making me feel comfortable, like I could be myself. The relationship developed slowly, with no pressure, no rush, just 2 people getting to know each other. We spent time together, walked through parks, shared stories, and talked about everything under the sun. There was something so effortless about being with her. Emily wasn't the type of woman who tried to stand out, her quiet confidence was what made her so attractive to me. About 2 years into our relationship, I decided to propose. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon, and we were walking through Discovery Park, with leaves falling around us. I remember exactly where I stood when I dropped to one knee and asked her, "Will you marry me?" She smiled, and without a second thought, said yes. That moment was perfect, simple, genuine, and unforgettable. After that, everything changed, and we started building a future together. After we got married, life was pretty smooth sailing, but of course, we had our fair share of ups and downs. My job often got stressful, and there were times I felt like I didn't have enough time for the family. But Emily was always there, a rock for me. She never complained, never seemed to mind. She just understood when I needed space or when I needed a little encouragement. She never stopped being supportive, no matter what. We have 2 children now. Our son, Noah, is 4 years old, and he's a bundle of energy. He's always running around the house, talking a mile a minute, and making us laugh with his never-ending questions. And then there's Lily, our 2-year-old daughter. She's already showing signs of being a little thinker, always observing and mimicking everything we do. Every day with them is a new adventure, and Emily is such a wonderful mom. She's got this amazing ability to juggle everything, work, the kids, the house, and still be the best partner I could ask for. She's the first one up in the morning, getting breakfast ready for all of us and making sure the kids are ready for school. She's so patient and always so thoughtful in everything she does for the family. Our life after marriage has been a mix of quiet moments and busy days, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I feel so lucky to have Emily by my side. She's not just my wife, she's my best friend. She's the one who has helped me through some of the toughest times in my life, and the one who keeps me grounded. No matter how crazy work gets, when I come home to her and the kids, everything feels right again. Emily is the heart of our family, and she has this incredible way of making even the busiest days feel manageable. Looking at my kids, I know we've built something beautiful together. Our home is filled with laughter, love, and a sense of security that I never want to take for granted. Emily has a way of making everything feel easy, even when life gets tough. And I'm thankful for every moment I get to spend with her and the kids. They make all the hard work, all the struggles, worth it. I love Emily because she's real. She's not perfect, but she's exactly who I need her to be. She's the mother of our children, the woman I married, and the person I'm lucky enough to grow old with. Every day with her is a reminder that what really matters isn't perfection, but the love and joy we find in the simple moments of life. But life in America, you know, it's not always what it seems. My cousin Ethan is a widower. His wife, Sarah, passed away a few years ago after a long battle with cancer. Losing her was a huge shock for him, and it left a hole in his life that he's been trying to fill ever since. After Sarah's passing, Ethan pretty much withdrew from everything, focusing all his energy on raising his son, Lucas. I know it hasn't been easy for him, and when his job required him to relocate to Seattle, he decided to move in with my family for a while. For me, family is family. I didn't think much of it when he asked to stay with us. I figured it would just be temporary, and we'd be able to help each other out during the transition. Lucas, Ethan's son, was about 10 years old at the time. He was a bit distant, and not the easiest kid to approach. But honestly, I didn't think much of it at first. Kids can be shy, especially when they're adjusting to big life changes, right? But as we spent more time together, I started noticing that Lucas wasn't just shy, he had a condition called social anxiety. It made it really hard for him to talk to people or even make eye contact. Every time someone spoke to him, he would go quiet, or just give one-word answers. If I asked him something, he would look at the ground, fidget with his hands, or avoid responding altogether. I started to feel for the kid. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk, it was just that the world around him felt overwhelming. What struck me, though, was how passionate Lucas was about photography. He had this old camera, nothing fancy, just a basic DSLR, but whenever he had it in his hands, he seemed to come alive. His dad, even, had bought it for him on his birthday, hoping it would be a way for Lucas to express himself. And I think it was working. Every time Lucas took a picture, it was like he was telling a story, even though he didn't speak much. I remember the first time Lucas approached me with the camera. He asked if I could pose for a picture. I was kind of surprised, but I agreed. There was something different in the way he held the camera. He was focused, calm, and I could tell that this was his comfort zone. When he looked through the lens, he didn't seem like the same kid who was uncomfortable with words. He looked confident. He wasn't shy. He wasn't anxious. He was an artist. Ethan, as a single dad, really tried to support Lucas in any way he could. He knew his son's social anxiety wasn't going to magically disappear, but he wanted to help him find something he could hold on to. That's why, despite the tight budget, Ethan took Lucas to a free photography class at a local community center. I could see how important it was to Ethan to help Lucas develop his passion, and to have him interact with other kids in a way that felt safe. One day, after the class, Lucas came back with a huge grin on his face, showing us the pictures he had taken. He was still quiet, but there was something in his eyes, a kind of pride. He had captured some beautiful shots, and though he didn't say it, I could tell it meant the world to him. For the first time, Lucas was connecting with the world around him, not through words, but through images. It was a breakthrough. I think what struck me the most was how Ethan, despite being a single father, always put his son first. He wasn't perfect, none of us are, but his devotion to Lucas was unshakable. There were days when I could see how hard Ethan was trying, balancing work, taking care of Lucas, and still making time to encourage his son's love of photography. It wasn't easy, but he kept at it, even when things seemed tough. As the months passed, Ethan and Lucas settled into our home. It wasn't always smooth sailing, living with family, especially when you're going through something as difficult as losing a spouse, is never easy. But I could see Lucas growing, slowly but surely. His anxiety didn't magically disappear, but his passion for photography gave him a way to express himself that words couldn't. I like to think that, in a way, it saved him. I also started seeing Ethan in a different light. I always knew he was a good guy, but watching him put everything he had into being a great father made me respect him even more. I don't know if he'll ever feel completely healed from the loss of Sarah, but I do know this: he's doing everything he can to give Lucas the best life possible. And that's all any parent can do. Living together for that time, we were all able to lean on each other. Lucas and I weren't exactly best friends, but we developed a bond through photography. I'd let him show me his latest shots, and I'd ask him about his process. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. It was how Lucas communicated, and I respected that. As for Ethan, he didn't need to say much to let me know how grateful he was for the support. Sometimes, just being there for someone is the most important thing. I still think about Lucas now, and I can't help but wonder where his photography will take him. He's got such a unique way of looking at the world, and I'm sure he'll continue to find ways to express himself through his art. And as for Ethan, I know he's always going to be there for his son, no matter what life throws their way. They've both been through so much, but the love and commitment they share is something I admire more than I can put into words. Time passed, and they stayed with us throughout the entire fall. My family lives in Seattle, a city that is often rainy, with light showers and a cool atmosphere, but it's very peaceful and comfortable. Our house isn't large, but it's spacious enough for our family to live comfortably. At the back of the house, there's a small garden, where I often sit in the afternoons after finishing work. I enjoy going out there, sitting on the old wooden chair, sipping tea, and relaxing in the air that smells faintly of damp earth. Lucas really enjoyed going out into the garden, perhaps because it gave him a sense of security. Every time he went outside, he would take the camera his father bought him. The camera had now become an essential part of Lucas's life. He almost never separated from it, almost as if it were a trusted friend. The camera wasn't an expensive item, just a regular film camera, but for Lucas, it was like the key that allowed him to escape from a world he felt he didn't belong to. My entire family had their own jobs and lives, and we didn't have much time to pay attention to the small details of Lucas's life. I always thought of him as just a quiet child, and it didn't seem strange that he was shy and rarely interacted with others. Ethan, my cousin, was the one who took care of Lucas, while I was busy with my own work and taking care of my small family. However, one day, while I was cleaning up in the living room, I happened to see Lucas's camera left on the table. The first photo I saw was a very ordinary one, a picture of the trees in the garden. The greenery was changing color, and yellow leaves were falling, creating a thin carpet on the ground. I didn't think much about it, as it seemed like the kind of photo I used to take when I was younger, back when I liked to go outside and snap pictures spontaneously. But when I flipped to the next pictures, I began to feel something was different. Each photo had a very special perspective, as if Lucas wasn't just taking pictures of simple things around him, but instead, he was looking at the world in a different, more delicate way that I hadn't expected. One photo captured a leaf falling through the air, as if frozen in time for a moment. The next was a scene of the faint light of late afternoon, shining through the treetops, casting long shadows on the ground. I had to look at that photo several times because I couldn't stop thinking about how Lucas had managed to capture such small moments, yet full of emotion. The child had done something I couldn't have imagined, seeing the details that most of us would overlook in our everyday lives. The more I looked at Lucas's photos, the more I felt something truly special in them. The boy didn't just capture scenes around him, it seemed like he was trying to tell a story with each photo. Each photo conveyed an emotion, a still moment that he had frozen in time. For a child like Lucas, who found it difficult to communicate with words, I realized he had found another way to express himself, through his photos. I'm not sure if Lucas was aware of this, but these photos were a way for him to connect with the outside world without having to speak. I wondered, was photography the bridge that helped Lucas overcome his inner fears? Perhaps this was the way he was learning to integrate, step by step, without having to directly face the stares or conversations that he always found difficult. But when I flipped to the next photo, I started to feel something unusual. I saw Emily and Ethan standing close to each other, laughing and chatting happily, their hands casually touching, as if it was a simple moment they had shared for a long time. It wasn't anything too special, was it? But then, I felt something difficult to describe, as if something was slipping out of my control. They didn't know I was watching, and I didn't know what to do with the strange feeling rising inside me. My heart suddenly tightened. I continued flipping through the photos, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw another picture. Emily and Ethan were embracing each other intimately. The scene in the photo was beautiful, with the soft evening light making everything look hazy, but all I could see was their closeness, an intimacy I hadn't been aware of. The feeling was like a slap in the face, leaving me breathless. My heart felt shattered, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I didn't know what to do at that moment, nor how to think. All I knew was that, in that instant, it felt like the world around me was collapsing. What I had thought was stability, the trust one had in my family, suddenly became something completely different. I felt betrayed, even though I hadn't confirmed what was happening. But the photos spoke volumes that I couldn't ignore. When I looked at that photo, I could sense a stark difference from all the other photos Lucas had taken before. The boy wasn't just capturing moments in the garden, now, it felt like he was recording a story, a part of a world I had never thought about. Lucas had seen something I couldn't see, and perhaps these photos were his way of showing me that. But still, I couldn't stop. A part of me wanted to put the camera down and forget it all, but another part of me wanted to keep searching for answers. Maybe I had misunderstood, maybe it was all just a coincidence, but the feeling inside me at that moment was something I couldn't quite put into words. When I sat down on the wooden chair in the living room, the photos kept flashing through my mind like an endless nightmare. Each photo was a vivid moment of closeness between Emily and Ethan, joyful smiles, natural touches of their hands, as if they had shared these moments for a long time. I couldn't shake these images from my mind. The feeling was like a hard slap to the face, suffocating me, making my heart shatter in my chest. I hadn't thought about this before. Maybe because I was too busy with work, too neglectful of the relationships around me. But now everything had changed. Those photos were like knives cutting into the fake peace I had worked so hard to build. I looked at those photos and felt like the world around me was collapsing. Everything I thought I knew about this family, about Emily, about Ethan, had now turned into a nightmare that I couldn't escape. Maybe I had trusted too much. I had never thought that they would do something behind my back. Ethan was my cousin, and Emily was my wife. I always thought everything between us was fine. But now, seeing those photos, I couldn't comprehend the feeling inside me. I felt betrayed. Although I hadn't really confirmed what was happening, those photos spoke volumes that I couldn't ignore. At that moment, I realized I couldn't just sit there and let this ambiguity linger. I needed to clear things up. I needed to find out the truth. No matter how painful the truth might be, I couldn't continue living in fear and doubt. I couldn't keep playing the role of the clueless husband while the world turned upside down before my eyes. I stood up and went straight upstairs, where Lucas was sitting in his room. The boy seemed oblivious to what was going on, absorbed in his computer, his eyes cold and distant. Even though he didn't say anything, I knew something was off. I hadn't paid enough attention to Lucas all this time. He kept to himself, rarely communicated, and I had just accepted it as normal. But now, I realized that Lucas might have seen things that I couldn't see. I stood in the doorway for a moment, observing him. Lucas didn't look up at me, but maybe he sensed a change in the air. I took a deep breath and decided I had to clarify everything. I couldn't keep living in this silence, letting doubts haunt me. Lucas, I began, my voice a little dry, have you noticed anything unusual between Emily and Ethan? At that moment, a strange surge of emotions rose inside me. It was anxiety, fear, and a bit of frustration. Why did I have to ask a kid like Lucas about this? Why couldn't I face Emily or Ethan myself, instead of relying on a child to uncover the truth? Lucas looked up, his gaze seemed to flash with a hint of surprise, then quickly shifted to a guarded look, as though he was trying to hide something. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he looked down at the camera, as if searching for an answer in the pictures he had taken. I could see that Lucas was really uncomfortable, but I couldn't stop now. I had come too far to turn back. Lucas stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his eyes filled with hesitation. I don't know, he said quietly, almost in a whisper. But I understood. I couldn't just let it go like that. I'll buy you a new camera, a better one than this, if you help me understand what's going on, I said calmly, trying to reason with him, my voice steady, though inside I was anything but. I could tell Lucas was wrestling with something, there was something on his mind, something he didn't want to say. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Lucas dropped his gaze to the floor, his eyes filled with worry. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly battling with what to do. I felt the weight of the silence in the room, the air heavy with unspoken words. Then, after what seemed like a long pause, he sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. Finally, in a voice barely audible, he spoke. I saw my dad and her kiss. The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, everything stopped. My heart skipped a beat, and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to deny it, to brush it off as a misunderstanding, but I knew that wasn't possible. My own brother, Ethan, someone I had trusted, someone I considered family, along with Emily, my wife, the woman I had shared so many years of my life with, they were involved. It was unthinkable. I stood frozen, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. My world felt like it was spinning out of control, like everything I had built, my family, my trust in them, was crumbling before my eyes. It was like being punched in the gut. Betrayal. That's what it was, pure and simple. Even though I didn't have all the details yet, the truth was staring me in the face, and I couldn't pretend it wasn't there. Lucas didn't say anything else. He kept his eyes on the floor, his lips pressed tight, like he was waiting for me to say something, anything. But what could I say? What could I do? I wanted to scream, to confront them both right then and there, but I knew I had to keep it together. For Lucas. For me. Lucas, you don't have to worry about this, okay? I said, my voice cracking slightly. I didn't want him to feel responsible, to carry this burden. I'm going to handle it. But deep down, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Lucas's words had torn down the wall of denial I had been living behind. The pictures, the quiet moments I'd noticed but never questioned, had all come crashing together now in one devastating realization. I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine anymore. The truth was out there, and it was up to me to figure out what came next. At that moment, it felt like I could hardly breathe. Everything around me seemed to stop, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. The shock spread through my body, making me feel as though I was standing on the edge of a completely different world, where everything I knew suddenly shattered. Just one sentence from Lucas, and it felt like a slap in the face. The boy continued, his voice trembling with fear. But they saw me, and said if I told anyone, they'd take the camera away. The look in Lucas' eyes, filled with fear, broke my heart. He was just a child who shouldn't have to carry this burden. But I couldn't stop my anger. It felt like everything around me was collapsing. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. I couldn't believe what had happened between Emily and Ethan, and now Lucas, the boy I cared for, was caught in the middle of this battle. Looking at him, I saw helplessness in his eyes, the silence that dared not say more. He hadn't just been pulled into this mess, he had been threatened, forced to keep secrets. And I, as a father, as a husband, couldn't do anything to protect him from what was happening. The fury inside me rose higher and higher, making it impossible for me to contain it any longer. At that moment, my anger was like a fire raging out of control. I wanted to scream, wanted to punch the wall, but then I thought of Lucas, thought of what he had been through. I couldn't blame the boy, couldn't blame Lucas for his fear and silence. But this truth, it was too painful to accept. I'm sorry, Lucas, I said, my voice suddenly choking, unable to continue. That apology sounded like a failure, like an admission that I hadn't protected him from this truth, that I couldn't protect my family from the evil I had been unaware of. Lucas looked down at the floor, his small shoulders trembling, as if he was holding back a terrible wave of emotion. He didn't say anything more, just sat there quietly. I couldn't look away. The guilt inside me felt like it was swallowing me whole. I had failed to protect my family, and now, I had to face betrayal right in my own home. It was unimaginable. Emily, Ethan, and now Lucas, it all seemed to be falling apart, piece by piece, pulling away from me. What do I do now? I silently asked myself. Unanswered questions, overwhelming emotions that I couldn't control. I didn't know what to do next. What had I done wrong? Could I save this family? Or was it too late? Every thought, every emotion inside me felt like a violent wave, crashing against the shore and relentlessly pushing me further. A part of me wanted to walk away, wanted to end everything so I wouldn't have to face this truth anymore. But the other part of me, the part one couldn't ignore, urged me to face it, to make things clear, no matter how painful the outcome. A long time passed, and I stood there, unable to move, unable to act. The feeling of betrayal, like I was standing on a thin sheet of ice, ready to break apart at any moment. But I knew one thing, I couldn't let this fear and pain take over. I had to do something, even though I didn't know where to start. Lucas remained silent, his eyes looking at me, not saying a word. Both of us knew that this silence was all that remained between us, a vast, uncertain space that I could never erase. After talking to Lucas, I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. Every word of his felt like a fresh wound, but I still managed to keep a calm exterior. I didn't want Lucas to see the change in me. That was the first time I realized how easy it was to mask your emotions when you're trying to protect the ones you love, even when your heart feels like it's shattering into pieces. The next day, I decided that I wouldn't let things slip by like this. If I had the chance, I wasn't going to let the truth remain hidden any longer. I went to an electronics store and picked out a new camera for Lucas, one far better and more expensive than the old one he had been using. I knew he'd be thrilled, but in my mind, this wasn't just a gift. I wanted to encourage his passion for photography, sure, but more than that, I wanted to create an opportunity to get more out of him. The camera was a way to get closer, a way to coax out more details, more truth. When I handed the camera to Lucas, he hesitated for a long moment before accepting it. His eyes were filled with anxiety, but I couldn't back down. I want you to keep following your passion for photography, I told him. This is just a little gift to show you that I'm here to support you. But deep down, I knew it wasn't really about the camera. It was a ruse, a means to an end. Soon after, I started planning a family getaway. I decided to invite Emily, Ethan, and Lucas to join us. I told them it had been a while since we all got together, and it would be good for us to relax, especially with how stressful work and life had been lately. The truth, though, was that relaxation was the furthest thing from my mind. This trip was my chance to catch Ethan and Emily in the act, to confirm the suspicions I'd had for a long time but hadn't dared speak aloud. I was determined to create an opportunity where I could see them for who they really were, no more hiding, no more lies. I chose a resort that was about 2 hours outside the city, a peaceful getaway in the countryside. It was a quiet area with spacious villas overlooking a lake, perfect for a vacation. I'd done my homework, researched the place thoroughly, and made sure everything was set up perfectly. I wanted this to feel as natural as possible, to raise no suspicions. But in reality, this was my chance to catch them, to see them with my own eyes. I had to prepare for the worst, but I wasn't sure how I'd handle it once I had the truth. I told Emily it was just a simple family retreat, a chance for all of us to reconnect. But in my heart, I knew the real reason. I needed to witness the truth, to finally confirm what I had suspected all along. While Emily was excited about the trip, I was steeling myself for what might come. This was my plan, a way to face what I wasn't ready to see, but knew I had to. I had to find out if there was a chance to salvage this family or if it was already too late. Even though I knew things might not go the way I hoped, I still felt I had to go through with it. I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. It was time to face whatever truth awaited me. That trip went smoothly at first, until we arrived at a quiet resort near the coast, just a few hours' drive from the city. The place was peaceful, tucked away on a beautiful stretch of beach. It was a well-known resort, with long sandy shores and luxurious villas nestled among dense forests. The scenery was breathtaking, the air fresh, everything you could want for a relaxing getaway. At least, that's what everyone else seemed to think. I had been planning this trip for over a week, carefully considering every detail. I chose this particular place because it was secluded, away from the crowds, but still had all the amenities we needed for comfort. Plus, the resort wasn't overcrowded with tourists, which made it perfect for my purpose, getting the space and time to observe, to look for the truth that I had been suspecting for a while. I wanted somewhere quiet, where there'd be no distractions, no other people around to intervene. I could sense that something was off, and I had to find out what. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. Emily seemed excited for some downtime, Ethan was looking forward to exploring, and Lucas, the young boy, just wanted to have some time to continue his photography hobby. I made sure to keep my face neutral, pretending to enjoy the calm and natural beauty of the place. But inside, I was on edge. My nerves were frayed. I had set the stage for a few situations where Emily and Ethan couldn't avoid being alone together, but I kept it casual. At first, I suggested we all go for a walk around the resort, a nice stroll by the beach to clear our heads. I told myself I was just trying to enjoy the trip, like anyone else would. But the truth is, I couldn't stop watching them. Every time I glanced at them, I could feel my suspicions growing stronger. Their interactions, the little glances they exchanged, the way they smiled at each other in passing, all of it felt off. There was a connection there, something I couldn't ignore. At first, I managed to keep my composure, maintaining the calm exterior that no one would suspect. But every time they exchanged a look or touch, it felt like a dagger in my chest. I tried to focus on other things, the sound of the waves, the fresh breeze, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were communicating something hidden, something secret. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, and the more I watched them, the more I felt like the truth was about to come crashing down. Then, one evening, while we were sitting on the beach, I saw Ethan and Emily standing a little ways from me, talking softly. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but when I saw the look they exchanged, the way they smiled at each other when they thought no one was watching, I knew. It was like a punch to the gut. That moment, I knew. The truth was right in front of me. The emotions inside me hit like a tidal wave. I wanted to rush over to them, confront them, and demand answers. But I knew it wasn't the right time. I couldn't be hasty. If I wanted the truth to come to light, I had to plan carefully. I had to keep my cool. If I confronted them now, everything would spiral out of control. But I couldn't forget the look they shared. The look said everything. All my suspicions suddenly felt validated, and I knew deep down that the truth couldn't be ignored any longer. That night, I decided it was time to expose everything and teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. I couldn't just sit there and let this lie continue. I needed to confront them, to make them realize that I wasn't some fool who didn't see what was going on. But I knew if I caused a scene, everything would fall apart. I had to be strategic. I had to make sure I had proof, make sure they didn't suspect the thing before everything came to light. Before I made my final decision, I had already thought through a plan. I couldn't do everything by myself, but I knew I needed help. I hired a few staff members at the resort to assist me in making this happen. They had no idea about the situation with my family, just ordinary employees doing their jobs. I approached one of the bartenders and, with careful words, asked him to slip something into the drinks that Emily and Ethan were going to have. It was a mild substance, just enough to make them feel lightheaded and tired, nothing dangerous but enough to get them to leave early without raising suspicion. I tried to act casual about it, assuring the bartender that I didn't want to cause any trouble, just wanted to make sure the atmosphere remained relaxed. He nodded, and I felt a pain of guilt in my stomach, but I knew I couldn't turn back. The betrayal was something I couldn't forgive, and I needed to get to the truth. When Emily and Ethan finally took their drinks, I kept an eye on them, my heart racing. It wasn't long before they started to show signs of the effect, Emily looking a little off balance, and Ethan following suit. They exchanged a glance, and then, just as I expected, they stood up and announced that they weren't feeling well and wanted to head back to their room. They left without knowing that I had already set up a camera in their room. I needed to see everything. After they left, I quietly stood up, using the excuse of wanting everyone to go back to their rooms. Hey, it's been a fun night. Why don't we head back and relax? It's been a long day, and we could all use a break, I said with a smile, hoping no one would notice the tension in my voice. Everyone agreed, and I made sure to stay close behind, but in my mind, I only had one goal, to catch them in the act. When I reached their room, I stood frozen for a second before I opened the door. What I saw made my stomach drop. Ethan and Emily were sitting together on the bed, their bodies close, no shame or hesitation in their movements. They exchanged looks, the kind that only confirmed everything I had suspected. Emily laid her head on Ethan's shoulder, and they were practically hugging each other. They didn't even try to hide it. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked in without saying a word. The pain in my chest felt like a punch, but I wasn't going to back down. I pulled out a small USB drive I had prepared earlier, one that contained all the evidence I had gathered, video footage, pictures, everything. I threw it onto the table in front of them, no words, just the proof. Emily quickly jumped up, her face pale. I was drunk, I thought you were him, she stammered, her words meaningless to me now. She didn't realize that I had seen everything. The drunk excuse was just another cheap way to cover up the truth. Ethan didn't say a word, his face filled with guilt, but I didn't care anymore. What could he say? What could they possibly say to make this right? The truth was out, and it wasn't something they could deny. I looked at them, silent, no need to say anything more. The truth was in my hands, and there was no way they could spin it. Everything had come to light. It was a strange day when Emily begged me for forgiveness. Her tears were endless, and her voice was shaky, full of regret and desperation. She fell to her knees, clinging to my hands like her life depended on it. Her face was pale, the dark circles under her eyes reflecting the sleepless night she must have had. She said, "David, I'm so sorry. Please, don't do this. I can't live without you. I love you, you know that, right?" Those words, though full of sincerity, fell flat. The weight of everything I'd seen, everything I'd learned, was just too much to ignore. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I couldn't forget the pictures, the text messages, the secrets she'd kept from me. And I couldn't forget Ethan, her affair with him, the lies, the betrayal that had torn my world apart. I stood there, frozen, not knowing how to feel. But I knew one thing, I couldn't forgive her. I looked at her, my expression unreadable, and finally spoke, my voice cold and steady. "Emily, what you did is unforgivable. We've been through so much together, but you destroyed everything. I can't keep living in this lie. It's over." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. It was like she didn't understand how we'd come to this point, but I knew it was too late. There was no going back. She stood up quickly, almost as if to protest, but I could see the hurt in her face. Her lips quivered, but she didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to say. The decision to divorce was not an easy one. Despite everything, we had spent years building a life together. We had 2 beautiful children, a house, friends, everything that should have been the foundation of a perfect family. But the betrayal was too much. It was something I couldn't erase, and I couldn't just pretend like nothing happened. We sat across from each other at the lawyer's office. The sterile, impersonal atmosphere made it all feel even worse. Emily still looked like the woman I had loved for so long, but now there was nothing familiar in her gaze. She was a stranger, a woman who had broken my trust in the worst way possible. I didn't say much as we signed the papers. She tried to apologize again, but her words were nothing but noise to me now. The damage had been done. "David, I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft. "I was stupid. I never meant to hurt you." I shook my head, signing the divorce papers with a finality that cut through everything. I looked up at her once more, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. There was no sympathy, no feeling of relief or sadness. Just emptiness. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. And I can't stay in this, I said, barely able to look at her anymore. She left quietly, and I didn't try to stop her. The door closed behind her, and with it, a chapter of my life was done. As for Ethan, I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. He was a man I once trusted, my cousin, someone I thought I could count on. But now? He had betrayed me, and I couldn't just let that slide. A few days after everything came out, I decided to take action. I called Ethan's workplace, and I sent over everything I had, photos, text messages, emails. Everything I had on him and Emily. I wasn't going to just sit back and let him continue his life without facing the consequences of his actions. It wasn't just about family anymore, it was about integrity, about standing up for what was right. Within a week, Ethan was fired. His colleagues were shocked, and the company didn't hesitate to distance themselves from him. Word spread quickly, and soon enough, Ethan found himself isolated, ridiculed, and without a job. But as much as I'd like to say I felt good about it, I didn't. Seeing him fall from grace didn't give me any joy. If anything, it just confirmed how far he'd fallen. But I had to do it. He had to face the consequences of his choices. The one thing that kept me going through all of this was Lucas. Ethan's son. A little boy who had nothing to do with any of this, but who now found himself caught in the middle of a family disaster. His world was being ripped apart, and I couldn't just sit back and let that happen. I decided to adopt Lucas. I knew that I had to. The poor kid had been through so much already, his parents' divorce, his father's disgrace. The least I could do was give him some stability, some sense of safety in a world that had betrayed him. I remember the first time he came to live with me. He was quiet, distant, almost like he was trying to protect himself from more hurt. I couldn't blame him. His whole world had been flipped upside down in the span of a few weeks. But I promised myself I'd do whatever it took to help him heal. He was just a kid, he shouldn't have had to go through all this. And I would make sure that, no matter what, he'd grow up with love, guidance, and everything he deserved. Life slowly started to move on. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything still hung heavy on my shoulders. But there were good days too. Days when Lucas would smile, when we'd sit down for dinner as a family and I'd feel, for the first time in a long while, like maybe things were going to be okay. I didn't regret the choices I made, but it didn't mean I wasn't affected by them. I couldn't erase the past, and I didn't want to forget what happened. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep living in the past. My children needed me. Lucas needed me. I couldn't change the mistakes of others, but I could make sure my future, our future, was better. So, I focused on what mattered, my kids, my family, and moving forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was enough.